three, four? No, three different computers going on here. Awesome. I guess, you know what? Let's start on a round number. I'll give it 2 more minutes for anyone to spawn into existence, and then we'll get started.
And I will use that time to verify that we're actually
Live?
yeah. Should we try downloading Godot or?
I'll get to that.
All right.
Because that is one of the things about Godot. You will not be waiting nearly as long as you would be if this was a Unity workshop. So you can literally download it when I put up the URL and still be fine.
All right. Perfect.
I almost considered not even downloading it and using that to demonstrate how small it is, but I think it'll just kind of speak for itself, so to speak, as far as that goes.
You try saying something?
Something. Wait and see much. Okay, it's 5:10. I'm going to assume that whomever wants to watch from the stream exists. No, I guess you're monitoring the chat. I have no way to see if anyone actually exists there. And I guess this is our in-person turnout. A little smaller than I was expecting, but we'll make it work, I guess. So, yeah. This is my introduction to Godot. And before we get too deep into things, I'll just throw up the QR codes that we always throw up on these things. Although, given how few people are in person, I can probably just move right past these because I think you're all in everything that you want to be at the very least. So, over the course of this workshop, going to try to do 3 things. First, like kind of explaining why you'd want to use Godot over, say, Unity, or doing it yourself, or anything else insane of that nature. Then go over some basics of like how Godot works and like some of the differences between it and Unity, some of the things it does better, worse, etc. And then, if we have time or continued interest, go through how to add VR support to a Godot project and get that running. So first, like, why Godot Unity exists? Well, a couple reasons. Same things that you would like in general. The same things that you would use any game engine for. It does math for you. It does all of like the complicated 3D stuff for you. Has cross-platform support because you really don't want to be figuring out how to support both Android, Windows, and whatever the heck else exists. And the big thing is, compared to most other game engines, it's open source and MIT licensed, which I'm not a lawyer, but I basically consider MIT licensing to be the do whatever the heck you want with license. You don't have to pay for it. They won't charge you pennies every single time someone installs your game, like a certain other engine was considering doing. It has support for multiple programming languages, its own GD script, C Sharp, and more. Although the more kind of should come with like a big asterisk there because that's a little tricky, but the thing is, you can use it with many different languages, and it's lightweight. But specifically, compared to Unity, it's free, bears emphasizing simpler scripting. Unity, you have to learn C Sharp, which for us as UMD students, where we like go over Java and like 131 and 132, this isn't as much of a problem because C Sharp is kind of Microsoft Java. But if you want a even simpler programming language, Godot uses a language that they call GD script, which is inspired by Python and as such is meant to be even simpler to pick up. And arguably, it has simpler XR tools. With the exception of having to copy and paste a script, it's like 2 checkboxes that you have to select, as opposed to Unity, where you have to pull out Google to figure out how to do anything. But there are some caveats. It is a younger community, it's a younger game engine, so you don't get like the big, giant community of Unity where like so many games are made in it. As far as from an XR Club perspective, the XR features are still kind of evolving and settling into a form that the maintainers of Godot actually want it to settle into. Another downside is for the best experience with Godot, you do kind of have to learn GD script, which is its own language, but it means having to like shift your mindset from Unity C Sharp to this completely different language, which you may or may not want to do. And then finally, it does use different terminology and paradigms from Unity, so like coming from it, it might be a little bit of like a vocabulary shock because of all of the different phrases for things. But without further ado, let's actually meet Godot. I've just been talking about it so far. So to get Godot, you simply go to godotengine.org/download. Click the big button for stable for your operating system. They should automatically detect what operating system you use, but if you have a Mac, you might have to like select whether or not you want like Universal or like Intel or Apple Silicon or whatever. So I'll give you a chance to download it. It is very lightweight. I didn't make this big enough, but the entire engine is like 200 megabytes or so. And we just lost video. Awesome.
No.
We're going to hope that that was just a fluke and continue as if nothing happened. But yeah, once you download it, you simply extract all of the zip file that it downloads, or extract all in Windows and just double click on it on Mac. And on Windows, it's just an exe. You don't have to like run any MSIs or any nonsense like that. And on macOS, you don't even have to drag it to your applications folder. You can just double click on it and launch it there. No need to fiddle around with having to move it anywhere or clicking yes on any UAC prompts or whatever. It's there. So I'm going to do this myself and kind of head out of the slideshow there. So I've already pre-downloaded this during my ComSci 433 lecture right before this workshop. Don't worry about it. So I'm just going to go to my downloads folder and let me make sure I'm actually clicking the right one. If you're on Windows, you will have two of these on Windows. You want to double click on the one that says that does not have console in its name. Otherwise, you'll just get like a random CMD looking window in addition to Godot, and that's not really necessary. So you just double click on the one that says stable. And if, like me, you just downloaded this, when you first open it, it will say something about you don't have any projects. Do you want to check out the asset library to get started or something like that? You can just click close there and ignore that message. So if you're here or if you're online and willing to follow along, at this point, I would encourage you to do so. So to create a project, you just click on this plus button, and then you get like a second window that pops up that's like asking for a project name, and a project path, and a couple other questions. Project name, I'm just going to type Godot workshop. And for your path, you want to select like the place on your file in your file system that you want to store it in. For some reason, it's trying to store in my OneDrive. I don't want that. So So yeah, I'm just going to store it in my documents folder. So you can select like the folder, and you'll select the folder that you want to contain it within. But because Godot is a little quirky, it wants you to like pass in a path that has nothing in it. It doesn't like automatically create a like separate folder for your project, but to do that, you just click on the create folder button up here, and it will create a folder within the directory that you just selected to store your project. Now, you have two more questions left that it's asking. The first is like what renderer you want to use. Now, there are three different options. There's forward plus, there's mobile, and then there's compatibility. If you want to dive more into the differences between them, I recommend reading through Godot's excellent documentation, but the short of it is forward plus is if you want to make like AAA quality, like actually nice graphics, use the full breadth of what the GPU has to offer, kind of desktop only kind of game. So like if you really want to put your desktop PC's GPU to bring it to its knees, that's the renderer you would choose. Mobile supports like standard, like recent generation mobile phones. It supports like crappier, older desktop environments, stuff like that. And then compatibility is what you would choose if you were doing like WebXR or wanting to run your project via WebAssembly. So for the purposes of this workshop and to provide people watching from home or potentially downloading whatever zip I may or may not provide at the end of this and trying to run it on your own Quest, I am going to select mobile because that is what you want to select if you want to run this on a actual Oculus Quest itself in standalone mode. But even though it says it's mobile, this will also work with desktop, OpenXR, Steam VR, Oculus Runtime, whatever. And then finally, it's asking us if we want to initialize version control. Since this is literally just a workshop thing, we're going to opt out of it creating a Git repo for us. But if you wanted to collaborate with friends or at a workplace or something like that, obviously you would leave Git on, but ain't nobody got time for that. And then once you've filled in everything, you just click Create and Edit, and the actual editor interface loads, takes a little bit, and here we are. This is the Godot editor. It probably looks vaguely familiar to Unity if you've either used Unity before or B came to or tuned into the XR Club's Unity workshops. It probably looks vaguely familiar. Obviously, the most prominent thing here is its scene view, which when you first create a project, even though Godot can do both 2D and 3D games, it starts you in 3D view. You have to explicitly tell it that you want to do 2D before the view will change. Then you have this, which we'll get into what this is doing in a bit, but this will show you your scene tree. This is your file system browser. In Unity, the equivalent of this normally sits like down here across the bottom of your screen. I forget if it has a different name. DJ, does it have a different name? Like the thing that shows all of the folders in your project.
That's just called the project window.
Yeah, so it's basically like the project window in Unity. And then you have your inspector, which if you add a node, it will show stuff about that. Well, I kind of just slipped and kind of gave an accidental sneak peek of one of the many differences between Godot and Unity, and that is some of the terminology that Godot uses. So in Unity, you have like the base unit of like actual file on your computer that contains things that can be put as a part of a game is called a scene. In Godot, okay, the screen just decided to commit self-die again. Okay, we're back. In Godot, in Godot, you do have a file. The file is a scene, so to speak, but that's about where the similarities stop. See, Unity, they have game objects, components, prefabs. What the Godot people did was they kind of went back to computer science principles, so to speak, and specifically like object-oriented principles. And as such, everything that you want to add to your scene or everything that you want to use as like a resource that kind of just does an ambient background task is a node. So to use a similar goofy analogy to what DJ used in his Unity workshop, this room could be a node. It could be like the root node of a scene file, but this room would be a node. I would be a node. DJ would be a node. All of you as event attendees would be nodes. And now, like, you could have nodes inside of those nodes even further. Like, you could have a hand or eyes, brain some of the time, etc. So, and another thing is scene files can be used like Unity prefabs. There is no distinction made between the two. You can just say, hey, Godot, I want to just stick all of the contents of this scene into the currently running scene, and it will happily just add that to your scene tree running live. So you can use scenes to kind of more fine grain on your like fine grain organize on your computer without worry of, is this going to grow too big and maybe want to turn it into like a scene. You just keep it a scene, and if it's now something that you actually want to be able to completely switch to, you're covered. So enough of me babbling on about differences between Godot and Unity and nodes. Let's actually meet our first node. So to do this, where did my mouse cursor go? If you're sitting on the Godot interface like this, you'll see on the left-hand side where the scene tree viewer is. You get 4 buttons since this is a new scene. 4 buttons are 2D scene, 3D scene, control, and I think if the screen will return, I think the 4th one is viewport. And since we want to do something that we can turn into a VR project, obviously we're going to go with 3D scene. So when I click that, all those buttons disappeared, and now I just have like a node. Why does this keep happening? Well, this is the IMD cable, so I don't know. Maybe it's a bad dock. So when I click that button, okay, we're having technical difficulty debugging now. It's connected there.
You got quite a few cables here.
Yeah.
Let's see if it's the. Can I bring the lights up for a second?
Okay, those of you watching the stream, hang tight, technical difficulties. And yeah.
Let's see if that one fails on you. If it does, well, if it does, then the next thing to try is swap the cable.
Yeah. Well, anyways, kind of picking up where left off. After I click that button, I now have a scene 3D, and now I kind of get this little thing that lets me change its position. I'm not going to do anything with that, but now we like have a root node of our scene. This is a very important thing to remember, so to speak, about Godot. Like, normally you have just, like, every scene has to have a root node, and then everything has to come underneath it, which is a bit different. Is that a question?
Yes.
Okay, DJ question.
Does a node have to have a transform in the same way that a game object must have a transform?
We'll be getting to that. Well, actually, that's an excellent question of, do nodes have transforms, or do they have to have transforms? So this gives me an excellent time to kind of segue into kind of introducing the inspector. So on the right-hand side of your screen, similar to where it is on Unity, you have your inspector view. And if you're coming from Unity brain, this view might seem very familiar. You might be thinking, wait, is a Node 3D component and is a Node a component? Which, I mean, coming from Unity, you wouldn't be wrong for thinking that. But like I said, Godot believes way more in object-orientedness. So you are not seeing components here. You are seeing a visual representation of the instance properties of everything up the inheritance chain. So like the object that you actually have, the node that you actually have is shown at the top, and then like each subsection is the inherited properties as you kind of walk up the inheritance chain. So we can see that as a node 3D, it has a transform. It also has visibility settings, but it also has all of the properties of a node. And a node has a node has settings about process, like multiprocessing. Not going to touch those. Don't even know what those are. Scary. It seems the cable is bad. We'll wait for it to come back. And also an editor description. We don't really need to touch anything under node, and unless you're doing really, really wacky things with your code, you will hardly ever have to touch anything with node in regular Godot usage. But the transform is a thing to note, but it's not particularly useful for our root node here because we don't want to like shift the world for the root node because that can cause all manner of weird noisemaker. All manner of weird things to occur. Yeah. Everything that visually displays, or even if it doesn't visually display, which is fun, inherits from node. And node inherits from object, but object is not shown in the Godot editor. It's like there, but not there. One weird design choice that they made as far as this hyper consistency elsewhere, so to speak. But okay, so we have this empty scene. Not very exciting. Let's actually add something that shows up to it. So to do that, we're going to click the little plus button in the top left-hand corner of the scene tree, and then Godot brings up this window that lets us choose a thing to add. Now, there's a different way to like add if you have like a 3D model that you've made in Blender or that you've downloaded online, but for the purposes of just having something to play with, there's a node that lets you get access to a couple primitive 3D shapes, like cubes, spheres, cylinders, and Godot calls that a mesh instance 3D. And so you just can like type in mesh into like the little search, and it'll automatically select mesh instance 3D, and then you just click create. And I told you guys that this was going to actually give you something that you can see. Right now, you might think I'm lying to you. That's just because we haven't selected a mesh. So, okay, let's try the other cable now. Excuse me. And we're back, hopefully for the entire rest of the time with no, I should not have said that. I jinxed it. Too soon. Okay. We'll probably have the screen flickering for the entire rest of the thing. Probably dongle being mid or something. But, so we have this mesh instance 3D. It's not showing anything. But if we look under the inspector, it looks a little different. Like I said, everything inherits from node, and moreover, anything that can be viewable in a 3D scene inherits from node 3D. So similar to our scene, we have a node 3D, and we have a node, so having all of the instance properties of those. But now we have a few more things in our inheritance tree. We now have a visual instance 3D, i.e. this is something that can actually be seen in 3D. We have a geometry instance 3D, which means we have something with geometry. And then at the tippy top we have mesh instance 3D, which we can see has one property called mesh. And if you click on empty, you get this drop down of a couple meshes that you can create. You can make funky things like array method meshes, placeholder meshes. Then you have a bunch of primitive shapes. You have text mesh, and then you can also load a 3D model that you have on your computer. But okay, where did my mouse cursor go? Okay. So to have something simple, we're just going to do a box mesh. This will give us a simple cube. Now we actually have some life in our scene. We have our cube because we added a mesh, and we can see it there. So now, similar to Unity, you can drag this mesh around by using like the little arrows on this little gizmo thing on it. You can like translate it along an axis. You can rotate it, wacky directions, and you can like stretch it. And I don't think that that's actually stretching it. Yeah, you have another thing that lets you translate for some reason because the Godot people thought it would be cool to have too. I guess it lets you move in two directions. It lets you move on a plane. Okay, so we have this cube. We can see how transforms work, very similar to Unity. But it's still a plain white cube. So let's kind of dive a little deeper into what these properties actually let you do. So a lot of the time when you have like another object as a property in Godot, you will get a little preview icon of that object that you can click. And then you get like a little sub-inspector of all of the properties of that thing. So in this case, we're seeing all of the sub-properties of the cube mesh. There are a lot of things that you can do here. So you can do things from like changing the size of your box. So like, let's say you want to make it a rectangle, you can just like type 20 there, and then that's not the right spot. You can like type 20 there, and then suddenly it's very long. But that's just like typing, setting the size of the box. Something more exciting to do is, say, setting the material, which again, we have one of these things where you can like select an object of some sort, either that you load or that you just like instantiate inside of the scene. So we're just going to make a new standard material 3D. There are fancy things that you can do with the other ones, but they're far outside the scope of a simple intro workshop. But if you ever want to have fun with shaders, those are the options that you would select. So you have a lot of different options. I feel like even more than what Unity originally like shows to you about how you customize your material. But for the purposes of having like something that you can instantly see, the most important one as far as changing the color of a thing, is, like Unity calls it, is albedo, which is a fancy way to say what color reflects off of a thing. So we can set its albedo to something, say, like, we can make this a red cube. We can make it a more vibrant shade of red. We can make it blue for some reason. I don't know. And again, Godot kind of rainbow shades these things to show, okay, this is like an object inside, that's a property of another object, that's a property of the thing that you're currently showing, so that it's like nice and easy to visually tell apart. It's a bit difficult to see on this projected screen, especially given that this is streaming from my PC in my apartment, and isn't actually here. And compression artifacts are kind of making the fact that you get colored edges of these things very clear. But just trust me, or if you're following along, you would see that you do. So having a cube is nice, but if you remember from like the Unity workshop, if you want to be able to do something in play mode, you need a couple more things in your scene before play mode will actually work. And first of which, let me move the cube a little bit like that, is a camera. So we'll go to the same exact spot that we went to grab our cube mesh, and instead just write camera. And we want a camera 3D. We will eventually want the XR camera, but not quite yet. That comes with more interesting things. You can also double click anything in those new scene tree item menus to like add it to your scene instead of having to click create. So you'll notice something. I had the box selected when I clicked the plus button. So when you click the plus, it adds whatever you find as a child of the node that you currently have selected. So this has the accidental effect of I just added the camera as a child of our box here, which is probably not what we actually want. Unless our box was like our character and we wanted like a little chase camera, so to speak. So to reparent it underneath our root node, we just drag it on top of the root node, and now we can see we have our box and our camera, and they're both on the same level. So also notice that the camera's at a wacky angle because it was a child of the box, and just like Unity, transforms apply to children of a thing. But if you like take something that's currently a child of something that has a transform applied and move it up the tree, Godot tries to be helpful and preserve the transforms even after you reparent it in the editor. To my knowledge, well, actually, not to my knowledge, it does not do this if you're doing it with scripts, but I guess I figured it'd be helpful for like you as you're actually editing your game. So to fix that, I've just gone to the transform section of the camera, because it also is a node 3D, because it also exists in a 3D scene. to reset it such that it's like looking at our cube. We can see that the camera 3D has its own properties, like you can change the field of view of it since this is just a 3D game. You can change how it projects if you want to make one of those weird games that uses like non-perspective projection, and a couple other things. But I've just set it so that's looking at our cube, and then like you can kind of move it back a little bit. But there's one last thing that we need to add to our scene before we can get a remotely reasonable result clicking on play. And that would be lighting. So we can click on that and then say light, and you'll see a lot more things show up for just typing in light into the add a node screen. Specifically, there's something called an omni-light, which I'm going to admit I forget what that is. Directional light, which kind of like casts light as if you're like pointing a flashlight at something, and then point light that like just emanates light. I feel like these are relatively similar to the similarly named things in Unity. So we're just going to get a directional light. And you want to make sure to say directional light 3D, obviously. We want the 3D object. And now, since I actually made sure to select the root node before I added it, I don't have to drag it up to be a child of the root node. It just is. So now I'm just going to use the little gizmo tools to move it to like a position such that it like actually casts like a cool shadow on our cube here. I am being challenged. Okay, so there we are. We now have like the 3 essential things to actually get something cool to appear when we click play. So now I click play, and that's not what we expected. It's bringing up a pop-up. And what the pop-up says, I doubt anyone can actually read this because I can't read this from where I'm standing here. I mean, if you're on the stream, you might be able to read it if YouTube isn't compressing this to like tiny size. But what this is saying is you don't have a main scene configured, so you cannot launch into play mode until you set one. So this is another difference between Unity and Godot, and it is one of the cooler differences. So the Unity editor kind of exists as its own weird thing, separate from like the runtime when you actually click build. Godot, there is no such distinction. The Godot editor is actually itself written in Godot, which has a couple interesting implications. First of which is when you're editing live in the editor, short of some things that Godot decides on your behalf to not run so that you don't explode your computer, all of the lighting effects, textures, even some shaders, all display live in the editor. You don't have to switch into play mode to see, okay, how is this thing going to look? You can be relatively certain that it will look exactly as it does in the editor, with the exception of, like, obviously camera angles and whatnot. And another thing is, because of this, you can also just like arbitrarily run on different scenes, regardless of if they're like a scene that you want to instantiate as like the way you would a prefab in Unity, or if they're like an actual scene. So for this reason, Godot has essentially two play buttons. It has the play button that lets you preview it like as if you were launching from like from Steam or like File Explorer or whatever. And then it has a play button that lets you preview the current scene. So if we click this one, we're going to get a pop-up also, but this is because we've just been been editing in essentially Untitled 1, so to speak. We actually have to give our scene a name and store it on the file system before Godot will actually run it for us. So for lack of any better creativity, I'm just going to call this scene main. And then it saves it as this thing called a .tscn, which is short for text scene. You can actually open up scene files and in like your favorite text editor, like VS Code or whatever, and it will probably be like a 100-line long file, but like you can actually read it. It's relatively human readable. I don't know why you would want to read it as a human, but you can actually read it. So now, after I saved, it has now started me in scene play mode, so to speak. So now I can actually see it connected to the camera. We had our cube until the screen flickered again. We have our cube, we have the lighting being rendered, and we can see that this is not too dissimilar from what we're seeing in our editor here. I forget though, I think there's even a way that I haven't really used ever to actually show like the view of the camera in like the editor view without having to switch into play mode. But I'm not remembering how to do that because I admittedly have not used Godot that much recently besides preparing for this workshop.
So do you in the play view, do you get a similar functionality to the editor where you can modify things?
Oh, yes. So the question for people who are online who or are watching a recording who might not have heard what DJ said is, do you get similar things to like how you can edit things live in Unity? And I think the answer is yes, but we can play around with this right now because I'm in. That is way too small. Come on, get bigger. So we have no, don't go big mode. Okay, so we have our play mode thing here, and then we have our editor. I can like try and drag this up, and it updates live. I can even probably, based on this, change like its albedo here. Like, let's say we want it red, and I didn't even have to escape out of the color picker. It just was updating. It's actually pretty cool. We can try that out too. So hit X, and it would appear the answer to that question is yes. Your changes persist after exiting play mode. Now.
Is that because like similar to like, well, you need the material separate from like if you change the position, because it's like if you like play your game, then like it moves something, and then you stop play mode, does it revert back to?
I'm honestly too far away to see specifically whether or not it actually returned to its original position. I mean, I guess I can verify visually. It did not return to its original position. I think if you want to do that, does it say reset or
Reload.
Yeah. So reload doesn't like reset the state of the scene. It just would like restart it with any modifications that you may or may not have made. Thank you, screen. Waiting. Okay, thank you. I feel bad for all the people watching online who get to see me die inside every time a thing that they cannot themselves see happens. Okay, so now I've kind of demoed play mode. I've added an object. Um, I would do more things like what DJ did in his Intro to Unity workshop, but this is XR Club, and admittedly, a cube floating in the middle of nowhere is not the most interesting thing in general, nor is it really interesting from an XR perspective. So I'm going to transition now into how we might add XR behavior into this project. And for that, I am going to not do what I just did. I'm going to minimize briefly and go back to our slideshow. So now adding XR. This takes a little bit of explanation getting into it. But basically, the Godot docs are an excellent resource for like how XR works in Godot. And if you go and follow this link, which I'm going to do simply because I need to copy and paste something out of here. If you go and follow this link, you will notice that there are essentially three main parts to turning on XR support in a Godot project. There is, you change one project setting, you add all of like the XR nodes in like the correct order, and then you write a small script to tell Godot to switch to XR mode when you start your project. The only one that's really like complicated is the last one. But I'll demonstrate all of the steps here. So if I minimize you again, and then go back to Godot.
Do you want me to get virtual desktop ready or something like that in the meantime?
I'll get it ready when I get to that part. So the first thing is if you go to project and then project settings in your menu bar, you get like the project settings here. What we want to do is we want to go to the XR tab, and then specifically the OpenXR submenu, and then we simply want to set enabled to on, and Godot warns us turning on OpenXR support requires an editor relaunch, and we just say sure thing and click save and restart, and Godot editor reloads, and now OpenXR support is turned on. The reason why you have to do that is since Godot has been adding their XR support late enough that they are able to take full advantage of OpenXR and build it in at the very beginning. And since OpenXR is apparently tied very closely to Vulkan, like it has to turn on things while it's starting up. And yeah, are there people actually watching the stream? Okay. Well, I guess at this point, I'm doing this for a singular faculty member, your own knowledge of Godot, and 2 people on the stream. Still going through, for lack of anything. What?
I'd be very interested in knowing how you can use code to control that cube.
Okay. That is something that I will demonstrate. I'll actually demonstrate scripting before that because the third part of adding XR support involves using scripts, but it involves using scripts in a very boring while also high-level way that really doesn't compare to the cube. But I'll also add like scripts to like a visual node, so to speak. So now you have to add the like open XR node, like the XR nodes. So to do this, XR just by nature has its own camera because the default camera of really any game engine is only really set up to be able to stream like just like one video feed. If you think of VR games that you may have played, experiences you might have tried, you obviously have the video for both eyes and then what's being shown as like a mirror on your PC screen. So we need a different camera, but even before all, to delete something, on macOS I think you only hit backspace, but on Windows you have to hit delete, which I have to do function delete here. And I want to delete my camera. And instead, we want to select the root node so that I can add to the root node. And the first node you add to add XR is called XR origin. And XR origin 3D. Because everything has to have 3D at the end of its name for some reason. And what the XR origin does is you can think of it as, like, to use the most popular headset, like if you're on your Quest and like you're setting up your boundary, potentially like getting into the position you want to like start the experience in, and you like hold your Oculus Meta button down to recenter, you can think of the XR origin as essentially representing to the game that point in space, specifically at that point in space on the floor. So the XR origin kind of gives Godot a frame of reference from which to figure out everything else off of that point. So while when adding things visually, everything will kind of just like stack on top of each other at that clump at the bottom. When you actually start the game, obviously the headset will probably appear at however tall you are in space, and like your two controllers will appear off of that, but they all appear as essentially transforms applied to the nodes underneath the XR origin. So I've mentioned headset and two controllers. So those are our two remaining nodes we have to add, and we have to add them underneath that XR origin so that it can do its transformation magic. So the next thing, so that we can actually use a headset, is the XR camera. We saw it while we were trying to add a regular camera. So we want to add the XR camera, which you'll notice, unlike like a regular camera, it has like the little camera gizmo view, but that's about where the similarities end, because, wait, did I add an XR camera or just a regular camera? No, only regular camera. That's weird.
It's like named XR camera, but no, it seems to have like a camera 3D.
Hold on. Oh no. Yes. So we want to come in again. XR camera 3D. I can read that far away. So I think this is just a side effect of the fact that the XR camera itself does not have any extra instance properties over top of a regular camera 3D. Which means you could technically mess with the field of view, which would have unknown side effects for someone using a VR headset. We're not going to mess with those. Pretty much, unless you want to have like a HUD element display relative to the user's head, or say apply any like cheesy low quality effects to their vision, you're generally not going to put any children under the XR camera or even script it at all. You just let the OpenXR runtime and like everything in that chain control that node. Now, having headset view is great, but we also want like the user's controllers, and the way we do that is we select our XR origin again. You want to make sure that it's under the origin and not the camera, otherwise I don't actually know what would happen. It's getting more frequent. I don't know why this is happening. So then the final thing we want to add is an XR controller. Well, actually, we want to add two of them, but we're just going to add one and then duplicate it. So we want to add our XR controller. So Godot has full like first-party support for essentially being able to not only have controllers, but also have like Vive trackers, or any other things you might want to bring into an XR project. So you get this little drop down here that says tracker, and there are a lot of different options here for if you want to add like full body tracking or anything like that. But we're just going to be boring here for tutorial purposes. We're going to say we're going to make this one our left hand. And then we're going to actually rename it because we don't want this to be named. That's not where the name is. If you double click on the name of anything, you can actually edit it. So we're gonna say like left hand. And now, okay.
Let's see what happens if you bring it up all three projectors. Goes on all three. Yeah, it's been a little while since I used this thing.
HDMI one, or
Be interesting to see if it goes out on all three.
would be interesting. But now I can actually read it, which will be helpful for the two people watching the stream, and anyone watching the recording who are probably more than questioning my sanity at this point. So now we have our left-hand controller because we've renamed it, and set it to track the left hand. We can simply right-click on it and then say, just say copy and then right click its parent and then say paste. And then we have two left hands, which is not what we want. We want to switch this to say right hand. And we want to switch the name to something slightly better and then say right hand. And now giving the user like tracked hand things is not really particularly interesting unless we actually give the user hands. So we're gonna just real quick add two mesh instances to kind of give the user me hands, so to speak. Although I'll opt for cubes instead of circles so that you can actually kind of see the like orientation of the hand and how it's tracking that too. I'm just going to say new mesh, new box mesh. Gonna make it way smaller because we don't want a 1 meter cube representing the user's hands. It's a little excessive. We're gonna turn it down and say like, so it's something in between here and here. I blame Apple's inability to create a sane processor that can actually output to displays that people actually use. And now, kind of just making it a 2 centimeter cube. I think that might actually be a bit too small, but it'll suffice for our purposes. Where did the cube go?
What's there?
Oh, yeah, that's just.
that one.
So now we have a mesh instance to represent our left hand. We're just going to copy it. Okay. It's really trippy. The like multi-display thing made me think my cursor was somewhere it wasn't. So we're gonna Control C, Control V, that, and now we have two meshes to represent our hands. We are nearly ready to run this. Now we must make our first foray into actually scripting this. And to do that, we have to, there are two different ways that you can add a script to something in Godot. The one that I prefer to do is you just right click on any node and then you say attach script. And then it'll bring up this prompt and it'll let you select what language you want. Which, if you install the Godot build that ships with C# support, I think you would see GD script and C# as options. Yes.
So would additional language support be more akin to these like modules or for the like editor versions, or like is it like a package that you can install?
I think it's a package that you can install. They've changed things in Godot 4 that I don't specifically know exactly how it works, but I think they're moving to this thing that they're calling GD extensions, and having like language support for those, or like allowing those to add alternate language support, but I can't really say for sure. So we're just going to say GD scripts. All of this is good. Apparently I typed 2 A's in main. Oh well. We're just going to leave it named main. And then say create, and then we actually have a text editor inside of the game engine. This is wild and not at all like Unity. It feels way more like Scratch. So now we have our like little script view. And our first scripting is going to be very lackluster, because what we're going to do is we're just going to follow the setting up XR link and then copy and paste, that will set up OpenXR support. If you were doing something fancy, you could change this to do something else. And I think there is a small modification that you need to make if you want to run natively on a Quest. And the docs go into way more detail than I can go into about that. So just copying and pasting this to kind of give an overview of what this does so that you aren't just blindly trusting people on the internet, granted the people who made the engine, and copying and pasting code. This essentially tells Godot, hey, use your XR server to find something that has OpenXR on the user's computer, and then see if it's initialized, turn off vsync, and tell the viewport, which is how Godot renders things, to use XR. It's a bit more complicated, but that's what it's doing. So now we want to just Control S and save this. And now is when I take a short interlude to actually turn on my own Quest to be able to run this. Because at this point, if I were to click the Scene Play Mode button, I believe it would try to start one of SteamVR. Well, actually, I don't have the Oculus runtime. It would try and start SteamVR, and then it would die because it can't find any headsets, and it would probably just either show a static view or.
You want to go and install the new virtual desktop runtime?
No. Right now, during the workshop, install pre-release OpenXR runtime. Definitely same behavior, no problem with that whatsoever. Okay, start virtual desktop. And I am not connected to Wi-Fi. That might be a problem.
You want me to try pulling it up here?
Yeah, that's probably a better idea. Anyways, and I have the club's account authorized. So lugged a heavier load in my backpack halfway across campus for nothing. Oh well. Never mind. I will say, as far as troubleshooting the projectors go, this one, its fan sounds like occasionally it like makes a slipping, screeching noise. It doesn't sound happy with life right now. And DJ, if it doesn't have Wi-Fi or isn't seeing ENPC, no biggie. I guess we can just imagine it running in XR. There are only 2 people watching it in this stream. It's not a huge tragedy if it doesn't work. Not public humiliation. Yes. Expect. Well, there were people, and I mean, there is this IMD. Sorry, what's your name? Okay. But like, there were more people here, and they just left. I guess probably other commitments. Only could stay for an hour. Fair enough. I I mean, I'm still trying to go through this, running into technical difficulties that I should have been able to foresee because my Quest does not have any Wi-Fi on it besides the XR Lab and apartment Wi-Fi. So I can't actually connect it to virtual desktop here. So now DJ's troubleshooting things on my behalf while I stand around staring blankly at the projectors that flicker occasionally.
I will have to go at this point too, but thank you for this. I realize you've been confronted with some pretty challenging technical problems. So
Yeah. Oh.
Your tenacity and a good job under tough circumstances.
Thank you. You're welcome to hang around. It seems like you actually did get that, but there's no virtual desktop.
I was gonna say like it should theoretically be working, but I need to connect virtual desktop.
Okay. That's on the club account, right? It should say Ian
Yes.
PC.
Okay. I just connected the Wi-Fi. All right, and the controllers decided to disappear as soon as they. There we go. Now they're back. And I'll remain. Okay.
Okay, then it adjusted my screen resolution for the people who are watching.
Can I watch CPR?
Yes, do that. It takes a weirdly long amount of time to actually.
I've gone full potato settings.
Well, it takes a while for SteamViewer to actually launch. Also, that's interesting. It's having bleed over because it actually changed the resolution.
Oh wow.
Okay. Now I should be able to do this.
Anyways, go on.
And it should installed successfully. Sees my GPU. Black screen.
Black void. Like it did switch to this. But I don't see it.
This is why you actually test out the things that you're going to talk about in the workshop before you actually try and do them. And my motivation to fix this is that, well, there are errors. That's an understatement. There are like 10,000 errors. Push this.
No render pipeline.
Render pipeline issues. That was probably. Yes, it is. You're high.
And the rendering. What was it? What did it want specifically?
In rendering project settings. Now I'm just debugging this while being streamed. I mean, I want to figure out why this isn't working. Environment, anti-aliasing, textures. I don't know. Why does that keep Yeah, sorry. I don't know. Maybe if I turn that off, I think.
That warning would have worked.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
no.
yeah. Now I see.
Well, there, if anyone's still watching the stream, there you are. I don't really feel like going over scripts to essentially empty room. And that's very lackluster. 5 people online